During a parish retreat as a teenager, he heard a stirring sermon by a visiting Passionist missionary priest who may have influenced his later decision to enter the Passionist order. Thomas attended local parochial school until he was sent away to Mount St. Mary's Prep, a distinguished old Catholic boarding school in Western Maryland. There he was an excellent student, active in sports and extracurricular activities. But he also enjoyed long walks in the hills and woods surrounding the campus. After graduating from Mount St. Mary's High School in 1932, he matriculated at the nearby Mount St. Mary's College, a Catholic liberal arts college where he finished his freshman year, but then dropped out because he did not feel engaged with his studies. By that time, he was in college and the country was deep in the Depression, and Thomas saw no future for himself after graduation but to work in the family coal business alongside his older brother Joe. However, his older sister Elizabeth had entered the Sisters of Charity order, which may have led him also to consider joining a religious order. He needed time to think, as he later said, and he quipped, as we have just heard, that he could find it either in prison or a monastery. The monastic life appealed to him since he was attracted to the contemplative life of the mind. So Thomas contacted the Passionists by letter in the summer of 1933 and arranged to enter the order as a novice in the fall of that year. He formally entered Holy Cross Seminary as a postulant in the fall of 1933, where he completed his second year of college and began his seminary training. The Congregation of the Passion was a Catholic monastic order committed to living and preaching the Passion of Christ. Thomas completed his novitiate and took his 4 monastic vows in 1935, assuming the religious name of Thomas Maria. Later in life, he redirected his 4th vow from the Passion of Christ to the Passion of the Earth. Altogether, it took 8 years of rigorous study as a seminarian to prepare him for ordination in 1942 at the old St. Patrick's Cathedral in Newark, New Jersey. These formative years of cloistered study during his seminary training allowed Thomas time for deep thought and reflection on Aristotle, Aquinas, Augustine, and the patristic fathers. After the monastic day ended at 9 p.m., Thomas often read for hours late into the night by covering his door with black felt to mask the light of his lamp. He had amazing energy. During that time, he absorbed the monastic discipline and marked his days by the daily cycle of the Liturgy of the Hours, which helped to put him in touch with the natural cycles of the great cosmic liturgy. Thomas felt that monastic life validated itself through its imitation of these diurnal, seasonal, and annual cycles. His studies took him to 6 of the order's monasteries in Dunkirk, New York, West Springfield, Massachusetts, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Jamaica, New York, Union City, New Jersey, and Brighton, Massachusetts. By the time he had completed his seminary studies, Thomas had earned the equivalent of a Bachelor of Arts degree. And while he studied at St. Michael's Monastery in Union City, New Jersey, he was allowed to travel to Manhattan on weekends to enjoy the cultural life of New York. During that time, he visited the Museum of Natural History and attended the Metropolitan Opera. He enjoyed Wagner, by the way. And even went to hear Dorothy Day and Peter Morin discuss pacifism and social justice at the Catholic Worker House on the Lower East Side. After his ordination, Thomas was sent to preach missions and taught briefly in parochial high school before petitioning the order to allow him to begin graduate studies in history in 1943 at the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. Here he completed his master's and doctorate in cultural history, writing a dissertation on the Italian philosopher of history, Giambattista Vico. His dissertation director, Professor Frederick Angyal Janossi, nurtured his interest in European history. A course in anthropology kindled his interest in comparative cultures. While completing his doctorate in 1948, Thomas decided to join a group of Passionist missionaries headed for China. They were sent to a mission in Peking, as it was then called, Beijing now, but were able to stay only about 6 months before they were forced to leave China by the victory of the Chinese Communist forces under Mao. On board the ship to China, he met Theodore de Bary, an American Fulbright scholar in Asian Studies from Columbia University, who became a lifelong friend and colleague. Thomas returned to the States to teach at a Passionist prep school in Dunkirk, New York, but his desire to return to China led him to enlist in the army as a chaplain during the Korean War, hoping to be sent to Japan, but instead he found himself stationed near Stuttgart, West Germany, to serve as a battalion chaplain for the next 4 years. Interesting. His responsibilities included not only attending to the Catholic troops, but providing pastoral ministry to their families and to the local German villagers. But he still found time to travel to Italy, Switzerland, England, and the Holy Land. Thomas did not care for army life, however, and decided not to re-enlist when his tour of duty was over. After his discharge from the Army in 1954, Thomas returned to the Passionist Seminary in Jamaica, New York, where he continued his study of Asian religions with Professor de Bary at the monthly Oriental Thought and Religion seminars at Columbia University. Bary was eventually allowed to teach part-time at Seton Hall, even though he was a member of a cloistered order, but these were difficult times for him as he struggled to discern his proper vocational role within the order. For a time, he was forbidden to teach, and he was kept on a short leash, forced to serve as the doorman of his Jamaica monastery as an act of humility. At one time, Thomas became so frustrated that he even considered leaving the Passionists to become a university chaplain in North Carolina. But when he contacted Bishop Vincent Waters with his request, he was informed that if he transferred to the Diocese of Raleigh, he would do as he was told. So Thomas decided not to leave the order. Out of the pot into the frying pan. Yet Thomas retained his sense of humor even under duress. A fellow Passionist who was very devoted to Our Lady of Fatima urged his students to pray to her, since she had promised that if Catholics made devotions to her, there would be no more war. He turned to Thomas for confirmation, saying, "Isn't this true, Father?" And Thomas replied, "Well, haven't there been 2 major world wars since she made that prediction?" After a long internal struggle with his superiors, he was permanently allowed to teach, and his distinguished academic career began, which would take him to St. John's University, Fordham University, and the Riverdale Center for Religious Studies. He also served as president of the American Teilhard Society from 1975 to 87. The next 30 years were the most productive in his career, resulting in numerous books, essays, papers, and talks that he completed before finally returning to Greensboro in 1995. Nor should we neglect Thomas's enduring influence on his many former students, colleagues, associates, readers, friends, and admirers who have extended his work and kept his vision alive. Thomas once observed that his role was to assist in identifying the pathology of the culture into which I was born and to foster a newly emergent historical cultural period that can be identified as the Ecozoic era. Today, the legacy of Thomas is comparable to that of any other great environmental figure of the 20th century, and it will continue to grow in the future as he will come to be seen as one of the most influential religious thinkers of our age. Thank you.